Now that we've finished discussing the tragedy and national disgrace that was Indian removal, let's get back to the political narrative. Now, when discussing the Indian removal and the Trail of Tears, I kind of gave away the fact that Vice President Martin Van Buren succeeded Andrew Jackson as president. But let's talk a little bit about how that happened. So, Jackson finished out his second term and went home to the Hermitage, and the Democratic Party chose as their candidate for the 1836 election sitting Vice President Martin Van Buren of New York. The Whigs, who had only really been around for just a short time, couple of years, hadn't really been around long enough to consolidate and organize and get behind one candidate. And so, because they couldn't choose one candidate, they came up with kind of a unique idea. They decided, since there were four candidates they couldn't choose from among, they decided to run all four of them in hopes that each one would win in his home region where he was popular, and therefore, even though none of them would get the majority of votes, it would prevent Van Buren from getting the majority of electoral votes and throw the whole thing to Congress, at which point they would throw their weight behind one of the Whigs, and that person would then become president. So they picked William Henry Harrison of Ohio. They picked Hugh White, senator from Tennessee. They picked Daniel Webster, very prominent senator and co-founder of the Whig Party from Massachusetts. And they picked Senator Willie Mangum from North Carolina. Now, their plan didn't work because, as you can see, Van Buren got 50.8% of the popular vote. Popular vote doesn't get you elected. However, he got 170 electoral votes, and all four of the other guys, if three of them had quit and thrown their support to just one, they still would have only gotten about 120 something and fallen far short. It was, however, looking close at one point. It was when Van Buren narrowly won Pennsylvania that put him over the top with enough electoral votes to claim the victory. Now, Van Buren's vice presidential running mate was Richard Mentor Johnson, longtime congressman from Kentucky and a hero of the War of 1812. In fact, one of the campaign slogans pertaining to Johnson was "Rumsey Dumpsey, Rumsey Dumpsey, Colonel Johnson killed Tecumseh." Alternate pronunciation of Tecumseh. So he became the ninth president of the United States with Van Buren's victory. Van Buren was the third person to be the sitting vice president and get elected president from there. So, John Adams went from being George Washington's vice president to being president. Thomas Jefferson went from Adams's vice president to being president. Then, skip a few presidents, Martin Van Buren goes from being Jackson's vice president to being president. Oddly enough, you would think that would be more common, but it didn't happen again until 1988 with George Herbert Walker Bush. Now, William Henry Harrison we're going to talk about more here in a second, but I do want you to take note of the fact that these other guys, basically there were two vice presidential candidates for the party, Francis Granger and John Tyler. And Tyler was the running mate of both Hugh White and Willie Mangum. Tyler was a senator from Virginia. Remember his names because he's going to show up again soon. So let's take a look at the actual electoral map. And as you can see, Hugh White won Tennessee and Georgia. William Henry Harrison won several states and quite a few votes, electoral votes compared to everyone else. Webster only carried his own state of Massachusetts, and Mangum only carried South Carolina, not even North Carolina, where he was from. All right, well, let's talk a little bit about Martin Van Buren as president. One of the things that he did right away was created the independent Treasury, which was an alternate way of handling the finances of the country, as opposed to the national bank, which had basically been allowed to disappear under Jackson. The independent Treasury was completely separate, and it completely separated the federal government from the banking system, which meant that federal money would no longer be available to state banks. And this was popular with some people and unpopular with others in the Democratic Party. Those Democrats who were pro-business didn't like this, because if you were pro-business, you wanted federal money to be available to the states so as to help business if that became necessary. However, a lot of the people who were pro-agriculture loved this because it meant that the federal government was going to be less involved in state governments, and a lot of the pro-agriculture Democrats, especially in the South, really were in support of states' rights. So a lot of Southern states' rights supporters who had left the Democratic Party came back to the Democratic Party, including John C. Calhoun, once this sort of pro-state government initiative was put in place. However, it hurt Van Buren. Now, William Henry Harrison, I said we'd talk more about him. We've talked about him before. He was the military governor of Indiana Territory, to whom Thomas Jefferson had written that letter way back in, it was somewhere around 1805 or so. He had written that letter laying out his plan for how to basically coerce Indians into removing themselves voluntarily by getting them in debt. He also, as military governor of the Ohio Territory, led the war against Tecumseh in the Ohio Valley, and then later also against the British in that region. So he was a war hero. So at the time that he ran, he was a senator from Ohio, which had been carved out of Indiana Territory. Indiana Territory became a couple or three different states. But he wasn't originally from that area, right? He had moved out there. He was from Virginia. He was from a wealthy slave-holding plantation family in Virginia. But that's not how he was presented politically. He was presented as a Westerner, right? Because he's out there on the frontier fighting Indians in Ohio. When he first ran for president in 1836, he would run again in 1840. He was called the log cabin candidate, and they had pictures of him made, drawings, in which he was sitting in front of a cabin drinking hard apple cider, because he's just one of you. He's just a common man of the people, like Andrew Jackson. That's what they were getting at. But in reality, he was not. He had had a very privileged background and upbringing. Now, his nickname was Old Tippecanoe, because Tippecanoe was the battle in which he had defeated Tecumseh's brother, the Prophet, that really decisive battle, which at this point, this is 1836, that was 23 years ago, roughly. So his running mate was John Tyler. I told you just a minute ago, watch for John Tyler. He'll show back up. And lo and behold, here he is, John Tyler of Virginia. This is in 1840. So Tyler was the VP candidate for two of the four Whigs. And then in 1840, he was the VP candidate for one of the one Whigs. And this led to, of course, Harrison's campaign rally, Tippecanoe and Tyler too. Well, when he was running in 1840, he's obviously running against Martin Van Buren. And Van Buren is being represented by the Whigs as this kind of elite, rich, fat cat who's living up in the mansion of the White House and is disconnected from the people, whereas old Tippecanoe, why, he's a rough-hewn frontiersman who understands the problems of regular guys like you and me. And again, that was kind of a stretch. It is interesting, though, that Van Buren's technique of getting Andrew Jackson elected got turned around and used on him. Van Buren was referred to by the Whigs at their rallies as Martin Van Ruin and as Van, the used-up man. Henry Clay tried to get the nomination in 1840 for the Whig Party, which he was a co-founder of, but they passed him over. He didn't make it. They went with Harrison. Clay was hoping he'd get it so that he could present himself as the American system guy, as the national bank guy, as opposed to Martin Van Buren, the independent Treasury guy. But they didn't work out. They decided to go with the war hero, William Henry Harrison. Clay had run unsuccessfully twice already, in 1824 and in 1832. So this time, when Harrison gets the nomination, Clay decides, well, okay, so I won't be president right now, but Harrison is good because he's kind of old. He was in his late 60s, and is not as experienced in Washington as Henry Clay was. I mean, he was experienced for being a senator for a while, being a governor, but Clay just didn't think that Harrison was able to run in the same high circles, intellectual circles he was, and so therefore he thought if Harrison gets elected, he will be easy to control, easy to manipulate, and that even if he can't be president, that Clay could therefore be the power behind the throne with Harrison. Well, the election is held, and Martin Van Ruin just gets shellacked. 234 electoral votes for Harrison, 60 for Van Buren. Harrison got 52.9% of the popular vote, and as you can see, won 19 states compared to Van Buren's 7. So that's it for Martin Van Buren. Time to go back up to New York for him, and William Henry Harrison takes over as President of the United States at age 68. At age 68, that means that he was the oldest person ever elected president up to that time, and that record would not be broken for about almost 150 years. It would be broken by Ronald Reagan in 1980 when he got elected at 69 years of age. That record would hold for a while until Donald Trump got elected. When Trump was elected, he was the oldest person ever elected president. And then Joe Biden was actually turned 78 shortly after the 2020 election. So that still means that William Henry Harrison's the fourth oldest president ever. Now, there's a disadvantage to being one of the oldest presidents ever. And that disadvantage for Harrison was he died not long after he was inaugurated. Died of pneumonia 1 month after the inauguration. Now, the story has always been that Harrison gave a really long-winded, boring speech that went on and on and on at his inauguration, and it was raining heavily, and he just stood there in the rain talking, and that he died from pneumonia as a result of that. Now, in reality, the pneumonia set in a little bit later than that, so it probably wasn't that caused him to get pneumonia, but maybe it was. Regardless, he wound up dead, and hey, there goes Henry Clay's plan to be the power behind the throne. Instead, no one's quite sure what to do because a president has never died in office before. Now, it's laid out in the Constitution that the vice president takes over, but people weren't that up on the Constitution because, again, it had never come up. So some people were kind of surprised that was in there. So John Tyler takes over. Will Rogers, the great early 20th century humorist, described the vice president as the easiest job in the world because basically all you do is wake up in the morning, check and see if the president's dead, and if he's not, you go back to bed. So Tyler was the first one to do that. A lot of people resented having John Tyler as president because they hadn't voted for him for president. They'd voted for him for vice president. And so instead of calling him His Excellency, he was referred to by many people as His Accidency. And turns out, even though he was a member of the Whig Party, he didn't really get along with the Whigs that much, and he didn't really fall in line with what they wanted. He was kind of similar to John Adams and the Federalists in that respect. He was very independently minded, and he fought like cats and dogs while he was president with his own party as well as the other party. So that's an interesting thing about John Tyler is the fact that, at least last time I checked, he had 2 grandsons who were still alive. He had children really, really late in life, and then his son had children really, really late in life. And so even though it's been, 160 years since he was president, as of 2020, he still has grandkids. All right, well, we will come back to the experience of John Tyler as president. But first, we're going to stop and take another look at cotton in the South.